everyone. Thank you for joining us around this virtual table dedicated to food 3D printing. I was recently told that we have until January 21st to wish people we meet a happy new year. So here I am. I wish you a safe, healthy, and prosperous 2022 year. It really feels good to be back and to continue discussing topics that shape vertical industries with leading insiders. And for those who do not know me, I'm Katie Cindy, managing editor at 3D Adept. And I have the pleasure to moderate this panel with Nina and Simon. Quick reminder for those of you that are listening to us for the first time, please feel free to ask any questions you may have in the Q&A chat in front of your screen. And at some point, we will pause and let our panelists already respond to you. So good afternoon, Simon. Good afternoon, Nina. Could you please introduce yourself as well as the company you're working for?
Who starts? Shall I start?
Nina, you're the top.
Yeah, Nina, please go first.
Welcome everybody. My name is Nina Hoff, and I'm co-founder and CEO of ByFlow, a company specialized in the development of technology, 3D printing specifically for the food industry. I found this company together with my brother, Floris. So we're a true family business, and we're based in the Netherlands, in Eindhoven, which is the smartest square kilometer of the Netherlands. I'm very happy to be here today, so thank you.
And my name is Simon, and I'm the head of business at a company called Meatech, where we're engaged in developing technologies for printing meat. So it's a kind of bioprinting, so printing with cells, and it all sometimes sounds a little bit like science fiction to some people, but I'd love to get into that. I've also been in 3D printing for ages, or at least it feels like ages, or at least over a decade. And was previously working with a company called Nanodimension, where we were printing, or continue to print, electronics using 3D printers. So all of this sort of long tail, unusual 3D printing stuff is what I've ended up doing, and we look forward to discussing it.
Thank you, Simon. And I like the part where you talk about Nanodimension, because I know that we met through Nanodimension, so it's really good for people to have your background here regarding that. So yeah, thank you. So 3D food printing was first considered as an opportunity to create disruptive marketing opportunities to engage buyers at live events, or to deliver a highly customized and timely interaction with customers and consumers. As a matter of fact, I remember that, Nina, you told me during an interview that we conducted one day that ByFlow was created in a similar context. So can we say there is a commercial market for 3D printed foods?
Yes, I believe so, indeed. It was an accident that we ended up in 3D printing food. As my brother developed his own 3D printer and built an extruder that was capable of printing paste materials. And he was always considering materials like ceramics and, for example, bronze clay or silicone materials, but which are very expensive to test with. So he was trying chocolate paste, Nutella to be specific, just as, you know, an entrepreneur, as an engineer, just trying out different stuff. And it turned out to be a great hit. And for the past 6-7 years, we've been trying to open up this market, which is very interesting to do. If you're pioneering in a market, you always have certain hurdles to overcome, but we will definitely come to that later during this talk. But to answer your question shortly, we definitely believe that there is a market for 3D printed foods, and therefore also for the technology, so the 3D printers that can make that happen.
All right. Thank you, Nina. Simon, do you agree with her? Do you have another point of view? Do you think that we are already in a ready to be commercialized, situation regarding 3D printed foods?
Well, to my mind, it looks as if we're in the period of breakout, where this starts to become something that people are engaging with, using, beginning to see in restaurants. I think if you go back 3, 2, even as little as a year ago, certainly pre-COVID, it seemed as if it was mostly the kind of thing that you'd find in in articles or magazines or trade shows. And I think I've been seeing it much more, that now you start to see stories about restaurants deploying it in the front line to make foods that are either aesthetic or taste-wise different, stuff I'm sure we'll touch on in this discussion. But it's meeting customers, it's meeting restaurants, it's meeting the food trade now.
Okay, so let's explore this scenario where this niche market reveals that its growth is likely to be affected by concerns that go beyond the aesthetic look of 3D printed food. Nina, what are the various alternative 3D printed products that can be developed by the food industry?
Yeah, so first of all, maybe good to explain what can be 3D printed in terms of food. There's many different ingredients that can be printed. So when we just started with 3D printing food, it was very limited to indeed ingredients like chocolate paste, simple ingredients off the shelf. But as we were experimenting along the way, we found out that actually any food, so any ingredients can be 3D printed, as long as you can either turn it into a paste, so a soft ingredient, or if you can, for example, mix it with different ingredients. I'm going to talk more about, let's say, ingredients that already have grown. For example, vegetables and fruits, and I believe Simon is more into the cells, so he's a step before us, let's say, in the food chain. But when you look at 3D printed food, in our opinion, so FDM printing, but then for food, any food can be printed as long as it is paste. So to give you a few examples, broccoli puree, strawberry puree, goat cheese, cookie dough, pasta dough, chocolate, but also meat, normal meat. We make it like a minced meat. Actually, 3D printing is already used on a large scale, because if you take a look at the food industry, they're already using extruders, but they're like super large, way more volume, and they're not as much into shape. So for example, when you think about a sausage, that is actually also created by an extruder. The extra value that we add is that we can differ in structure of food, texture of food. We can mix ingredients, mix flavors, for example, and we can really play with the shape to make it really personalized on the spot. So yeah, there's definitely a broad range of alternative foods that can be created, and I believe we're just at the beginning of it. As Simon was saying, now really the market is opening up, going faster. It took us 5-6 years to get to this point. Very happy to see that more and more companies like MeTech as well are helping us to open up that market, because we can use as many people as possible to really create this new market.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. In most communications dedicated to 3D food printing, extrusion-based printing is often the main manufacturing process highlighted, as you just mentioned, Nina. But I know, and I guess there are certainly, different types of 3D printing processes that can be used to create 3D printed food. Do we already have some 3D printing processes that have proven their worth on this market, Simon?
Yes, I think there are a lot of analogies between 3D printed food and traditional 3D printing, and I'm beginning to see the same kind of narrative emerging around the printing of food that one perhaps has seen if you're familiar with traditional plastic or metal 3D printing, where initially it's very much a focus on FDM printing, for example, where extrusion is key because it gives you that range of materials, and it's relatively forgiving when it comes to the viscosities of materials. But there are others. You can use inkjet printing, or you can use jetting of materials, which might be piezo and might be valve based. So some of those are also used in industry. You see in the electronics industry, dispensing of glue, and in factories as well. That's often done by jetting the material, and that's for higher viscosity materials, and may even lead to higher throughput, because I think what we'll find is there are loads of advantages to using 3D printing in the making of food. And sooner or later, people will start to talk about it as if it was additive manufacturing. Is exactly what happened with regular 3D printing, and it's really mostly a question of scale. When this starts to become an industrial process, when you have much higher throughput and you have much bigger machines, then people will call it additive manufacturing, instead of 3D printing of food. But essentially, I think that's the way we're going, and we're seeing more deposition technologies emerge, many of which are familiar from traditional 3D printing.
Thank you, Simon. Nina, do you want to share something regarding that?
No, I think Simon already mentioned most of the interesting methods for 3D printing. I do believe that when we just started with 3D food printing, it was, for example, syringe-based, low volume. That what is very important in the coming years is to really ramp it up and being able to scale up the production also of food to make it really an interesting business model as well. I think there are still some challenges to overcome. And of course, what is always behind us is law, for example. So taking a look at food safety and stuff like that. There isn't really yet guidelines, let's say, or laws for using additive manufacturing in the food industry. So I'm also very curious to see what is going on there in the coming years.
Yeah. I would like to come back to something that Simon has said earlier, because one of my main concerns regarding food 3D printing was actually material. The manufacturers use chemical nutrients to formulate 3D printable materials for food.
Yes.
Simon?
Yeah, so I think the material side of things is really interesting, because many of these products haven't been printed before, and it's early days, so people are having to do their own material science in order to look at how do we achieve something that's maybe rigid enough but still nice to bite into, or how do we avoid the thing collapsing after we printed it, but still allow people to have a good mouthfeel, because it's I'd almost look at it a little bit like it's I don't know if it's mechanical parts or if it's 4D printing, but you're actually really focused on the experience that the consumer has afterwards. And it's great that it looks good, and it's nice if it's tidy and it smells good and the flavors are right, but the feel has to be perfect as well. And I think this is one of the things that is really key. When you start using new technologies for making food, and food is super emotional and it's very culturally significant, and people are very passionate about what they eat. And when you think about, what do people define as tasty or as high quality, normally it goes to nostalgia. It goes to the way things have traditionally been done, and maybe it's organic. It doesn't use technology. And I think what we're trying to do here is bring technology which might seem intimidating and might seem unnatural and might seem laboratory-esque, and then it's up to us to make sure that people receive that positively. And there's a lot of work that I think to do around the whole sort of end experience, because we have to overcome the fact that we're using machines and that we're using inks or pastes, and still be seen as exciting, natural, and delicious.
Yeah, that's right. But in industrial manufacturing, because at 3D Adab Media, we used to tackle everything surrounding 3D printing, from a product perspective. And in industrial manufacturing, there are usually a lot of constraints regarding software. What about 3D food printing? Does software raise certain concerns to scale production here?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we're certainly writing the software as we go. We're developing our own machines. I think it's very much like Nina was saying, this is early enough that each company is developing their own machines. They're working on their own extruders. They're working on their own software. They're working on their own process materials, and that's a natural thing early on in the evolution of an industry, and that's what happened in others beforehand. So it's happening. I think it's happening with food, and not that many machines are commercially available yet either. There are some, but many of them you hear about. Certainly the scale, sort of commercial scale printing systems are sometimes even almost like one-offs. It's almost like the beta stage of the industry. I'm not
Yeah.
aware. Maybe Nina knows better than I, but I'm not aware of really sort of mass 3D printing being used outside of maybe chocolate is where I've
Yeah.
seen it being done, really, really high volume. But I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen it fully scaled elsewhere yet.
Yeah, I see. But Nina, do you feel the same? I mean, do your by flows user, do they need to have, certain expertise or, a certain skill to use, for instance, by flows 3D printers?
Yeah, so I think it's good to emphasize something because maybe we're looking at the whole food industry right now.
Yeah.
And of course, there's different target groups within that food industry and therefore also different needs within that food industry. So where Simon was talking about indeed really scaling up production, also really into manufacturing places, you need different technology than when you're talking, for example, towards high-end restaurants
Yeah.
or a smaller chocolate company. So
Mhm.
I think it's really important to emphasize that. Although maybe the technology, the method that is probably similar or even the same, the size of a machine or the complexity of a machine or the throughput of a machine is probably completely different.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing to mention before I answer the other question. Well, as you can see behind me, I have a machine standing here, which is a tabletop machine. So that's probably not the machines that Simon is working on, which are probably as big as the room as I'm in currently. So we are really targeting high-end restaurants, catering companies, hotel chains, bakeries, and chocolate chains. And they really ask for machines that can help them in their production processes, smaller scale, to create, for example, personalized foods or to come up with foods with different textures so they can make new products. So for us, it is really important indeed to think about the software
Yeah.
also for a user, not only to use the machine, so it has to be easy to use software. Think about how you use your smartphone. We wanted to make it as easy to use your 3D printer so
Yeah.
that you don't need any technical knowledge. Because if you're a chef or a chocolatier or even an intern working at such a company, you've probably never have had to deal with technology in such a way. So that's why we invest a lot of time and money into making our processes very easy. So it's touchscreen based, just a few clicks of a button. But the step before that is, of course, the designing software. And that is quite complicated. Right now, if you take a look at the market, there's almost no designing software available for people that do not have a design background. That's why we worked at Byflow on Byflow Studio, an online platform where you can just upload images or use like a paint kind of function to make a drawing, to write a text, whatever
Yeah.
is necessary. And then the software will automatically transform it into a 3D printable model. And I think this takes really away the boundary of adapting 3D printing technology in your kitchen. So that is very important for us to not only focus on the hardware, but also focus on the software, actually the whole ecosystem
Yeah.
of making 3D printing of food adaptable for the food industry. And I think that same matter goes for larger companies, because as soon as it becomes too complex, it takes very long to adapt it. People will be hesitant, especially in the food industry, which is a very conservative market, sorry to say, and very traditional. So I think it's really important for companies like ours, but also like MeTech, to work on those technologies to make them as easy as possible for other companies to adapt and embrace, let's say, 3D printing of food.
That's something I usually hear from aerospace. I mean, additive manufacturing. That the aerospace market is a very traditional market and very conservative one. And I didn't expect. I mean, it's quite a surprise for me to hear that the food industry is. I mean, is also a conservative market. So yeah, that's brand new for me. I would like to say. Uh, and I wanted to focus right now on the production of culture meat. I don't know if Simon can share some of MeatTech secrets with us. How do we produce culture meat? What are the different manufacturing the manufacturing process stages, and where those, I mean, 3D printing come into play at this level.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a case that, a company like MeTech, we do printing,
Yeah.
but we're also essentially almost like a biotechnology company, because the process for making cultured meat, you can make various different products and they'd all be considered cultured meat. Some of them might be printed and some of them, might just be mixed up materials in a sense. And so to explain the process, hopefully in sort of layman's terms, the underlying process is first you have to make the material that you plan to print with. And in our case, those are inks that contain living cells. So our first mission is make as many cells as possible. And then you'd say, well, which cells should we make? And when it comes to food, when it comes to meat in particular, the cells that are most relevant are muscle cells, and that's where the protein really comes from, and fat cells, which is where your need to go on a diet comes from, but also where a lot of the flavor and a lot of the mouthfeel comes from as well. And so those are the constituent parts of the inks.
Yeah.
And the reason for cultured meat is obviously that there's a lot of pressure on the environment from traditional agriculture. There's a lot of pressure on water systems and on land use, and obviously the animals didn't vote to be part of that industry either. And so the various ethical and sustainability reasons that people find it interesting. And so what we currently do is we take a sample of stem cells, and those cells are the kinds of cells that can become any kind of cell in the body. And so if you start with a stem cell, mission number one is we need many of them. So you have to grow as many cells as you can. And if you think about what any one individual cell wants, for example, maybe it's a cow cell. The cow cell wants to be in a cow. It expects to be in a cow. It expects all of the environmental conditions to be like those inside of a cow. And that's what we have to replicate without having a cow being involved. And that means the right temperature, the right pH, the right nutrients, because the cells are essentially individual living things. And if you treat them well and you know how to keep them happy, what cells do is they divide. And so if you have one cell today, you'll have 2 cells tomorrow, you'll have 4 cells the day after. And actually this adds up to quite a lot quite quickly if you can scale the process. And so it's using the cell samples to grow as many cells as possible, be able to turn them into the muscle and the fat cells that are what we want in the end ingredients. And then you have 2 things. You could make meatballs by just mixing it up. Or if you want to do the more difficult thing, and that's why we're using printing. By using bioprinting, you can position those cells in structures in delicate ways. It requires relatively high resolution printing, and then when those cells are held in place, the vision is you can make structures that are like tissues, and a tissue is essentially like a steak. And those are the kinds of products that attract the highest prices. But we also think are the ones that will appeal the most to meat eaters. If you want to get somebody in Texas to put something that's on their barbecue and it isn't a steak, good luck. And that's exactly what we want to achieve.
Can I maybe ask you a question also for that, Simon?
Yeah.
So within MeTech, are you then more focused on those cells to develop methods to grow those cells, or on the additive manufacturing technology? What is more important to you?
So it's a split. So from the MeTech perspective, we're working on growing cells that are either beef cells or chicken cells or pork cells at the moment, and it's absolutely crucial. Without the ability to scale that production, which is very complex, and at the moment is still quite an expensive technology. It's certainly not ready to go high scale mass market anytime soon. So that's a big challenge. It's expensive, and it's really sort of hard R&D. And the printing, is something that we do because that's the skill set that we have in the company, and it's the vision that we have is to make those complex structured products. But you could have the two separate. You could have a company working on bioprinters, and you could have a company working on making the cells, and they could also collaborate. We feel it's just quicker and to our skill set, easier to have it under one roof.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I had one question, but that's a personal thought I would like to hear from you, Simon. So I believe you have already tested cultured meat, I mean 3D printed meat and real meat. Do you have any preference? Is there any difference between both?
So I've tried a category of product which is called hybrid.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound super appetizing, but that's a mix of plant-based proteins and then cultured fat. And so using the cultured fat because it's got great aromas and it works as a binder as well, so it helps to keep things together. So in that area, I was blown away by the power of the animal derived, no animals involved, but animal type fats in particular. When it comes to flavor and aroma, it really does move the needle on the product, on the sort of culinary experience you have as a consumer. My colleagues who are more involved directly in the steak, we recently announced the printing of what we believe is the biggest bioprinted steak to date. That was back in December, and that's clearly it's a prototype on a journey towards the ultimate end product, and there's still work to do on things like texture, and there's still work to do on things like taste, etc. But it's certainly pun intended, beginning to take shape, and those cells are are being printed and produced, and they're collaborating in the process so far. But these are technologies that are not that are not going to be on store shelves this year or next year for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, let's pause for a minute just to take some of the questions from the audience. We have a few of them in the Q&A chat. All of them from Denise. Thank you, Denise, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So the first one is, what are the benefits of 3D printing food, and what does it take to make it a globally used production technology in the food industry? I don't know if Nina wants to go ahead to try to answer this one.
Well, I think Dennis knows the answers for me already because I know Dennis. Hi, Dennis. It is I can imagine that people think it's more expensive right now, for example, to create 3D printed foods. But with any new product in the first stage, it's always more expensive. And as long as it can go to the mass market, it will become a bit cheaper. But we're still in the high end range, so we have a different target market. So maybe I don't know if Simon has a different view on it, but
yeah. Well, I think when I think about it from an industrial perspective, and you're right, Nina, I think it's great that we're quite compatible in that you're focusing on a particular end of the market, and we're really thinking about the manufacturing, sort of mass manufacturing end of things. It's quite exciting speaking to the kinds of companies that I come into touch with, who look at the potential for 3D printing, and in my case it's cultured meat, but just in general, the things that seem to interest the large companies and that seem to interest the retailers. Let's assume that everybody solves the cost and the throughput issues, which I think, in my opinion, are a matter of time. And let's say that those things are achieved. What's inherently exciting, for companies about 3D printing is, it allows you to dramatically shorten your supply chain. And it's a lot of the things that you get from traditional additive manufacturing. You can start making the end products maybe closer to the customers. You can shrink the supply chain. You can make supply chain management easier. You can also commit to what kind of end product you want a lot later in the supply chain process. So if you know that the market is really interested in one particular type of thing right now, maybe you only need to prepare a month ahead of time instead of a year ahead of time. And so it allows them to de-risk supply chains. I think in the instance, when it comes to food, it might even allow you to avoid foodborne illnesses, certainly compared to traditional meat production. There's things like E. coli and salmonella you have to keep an eye on. And printing maybe and these sort of types of manufacturing technologies can de-risk that sort of thing. and it has lots of industrial advantages. I mean, obviously for customers, it's personalized and customized, and you can have a good cultural fit, and all the things you need to have, good customer acceptance. But industry is really interested in it, for reasons that are balance sheet, supply chain, and all that sort of dull stuff. That
And if I may add that, Simon, as well, I also believe that we are, as customers, we don't even know anymore what should be the actual price of food products. Because the whole food industry, if you would really take a look at it from the start, so let's say from the farming until it ends up in the supermarket, there are so many people working in that whole supply chain already. And that if you go to the supermarket today, especially here in the Netherlands, if you take a look at your vegetables or fruits or where they come from, they travel from all over the world, and we still expect them to be fresh. We expect them to be fresh for days, etc. So I also believe that with 3D printing, as it is indeed a technology for local production, this is a huge opportunity for us to not only work on new foods, but especially to also rethink about our whole food system and our whole supply chain, let's say, for environment, for cost perspective, for feeding the whole world where it's only growing population. So I think with technology, and I'm not only saying it will be 3D printing, it will be other technologies as well, that it is a very important tool to solve a few of those issues within the food supply chain, and to really calculate the actual costs of a food product that ends up on your plate.
Thank you, Nina. Before we move to Donnie's next questions, I wanted to ask, who does this market target? Does this market target flexitarians, vegetarians, or non-vegetarians? Simon?
So cultured meat, the dream is just to make something, a product that is indistinguishable or a no compromise alternative to conventionally produced meat. Yeah. So when we sit down and we think about who's going to be the end consumer, we hope everybody and anybody. And it's great that you have companies like Beyond and Impossible that are reinventing what it means to be making vegan or vegetarian products, and they're definitely doing a good job of getting at least flexitarians interested. Maybe not a perfect job of getting the hardcore meat eaters on board. And so I think our mission is to appeal to those that have the meatiest expectations, and we believe that cultured meat is probably the route to doing that, and it can give the flavors and the capabilities that are maybe hard to do with soya or pea or other types of proteins that plant-based protein producers are working with. That said, obviously they're doing a great job. So we want to convince the meat eaters, and that's really one of the reasons that drove us to printing as well, which is that it's not enough to have the cells; they have to look and feel just right, and you can adjust the fat proportions. I'm sure you guys can do the same thing with Biflow. Do you want to have more of one particular aspect of the product, a little bit fattier? Maybe you're celebrating, maybe it's January and you've got all those New Year's resolutions, so you want a 0 fat steak this time. Thank you very much. You can allow the systems to to help you with your choices as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And may I ask, Simon, do you also believe that after meat, other ingredients can follow? I mean, in the end, fruits and vegetables, for example, are also made of cells.
So, I mean, I haven't. I think the challenge is always going to be cost and scale. And I think if companies are able to get the costs down, then really the sky's the limit. I mean, there's phenomenal work being done in the space of if you're looking at culturing, companies are using culturing to make every possible kind of animal. I know of companies working on horse and various types of fish and kangaroo and camel and you name it. There's a lot of talk of shouldn't we be having exotic animals as well? I mean, how about a bit of zebra meatball or whatever? Does it matter now because you can essentially do this without harming the animals? So there's a whole range of animal products, but absolutely, I mean, if you look at milk and cheeses and doing this from the cellular level, I think there's tremendous opportunity to take some of the stress off of the environment and the quite intense agricultural system. That said, vertical farming is doing really well. I mean, obviously Holland is a real leader in that kind of area, and you see, maybe the innovation comes from the countries that are not necessarily that big. They don't have all of the agricultural land available. So, like a Holland, which has used technology to become an agricultural superpower, places like Singapore or the UAE, they don't have any agriculture, and they might be exposed to future competition for food, because competition for food is coming, and we all need to be able to make things locally, as soon as possible, so that we don't end up being at the end of the line, when everybody's hungry.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. There is one question that is just coming from the live YouTube channel. What are the main limitations to the development of 3D food printing? Is the general public ready for this type of product? Oh, that's a tricky question.
Maybe I can answer it because we're already on the market.
Yeah.
And we already got a lot of feedback. So yes, I think we had a big struggle in the recent years to bring this technology to market and to convince consumers, for example, or users of our machines that 3D food printing is not artificial. Many people immediately think that you must have added something crazy because it almost looks like a Star Trek movie, so it looks something of another planet. But slowly, I do believe, especially with so many companies now entering the space, that it's starting to become more common. And I think that's mainly due to educating, to presenting, to be transparent and open on what 3D food printing does. And I think that's also one of the strengths, let's say, of 3D food printing on a smaller scale, like we are doing, that we really put the machine in front of the eyes of a consumer, for example, or for a user, to demonstrate them how 3D food printing works, what we're putting into the machine, and then eventually what comes out. And I think what is really nice to share is that 6 years ago, when we were demoing our machine for the first time for chocolate-based, especially children were very eager to just try it, and they were especially very excited. It was more, let's say, the older people, 40, 50 plus, that were more hesitant. When we did, for example, the first time meat print 5 years ago in Australia, which was actual meat printing, so like minced meat, I remember we had a lot of hate comments coming over us, of people really thinking that we put chickens inside of the printer and then that we would extrude them out, or really weird questions like, do you put an egg into the printer and a chicken comes out? Like a lot of crazy stuff. But because we have such an open system and we can really demonstrate how it works, I think those boundaries are getting lower. And I must say that for sweet ingredients such as chocolate or cookies or pasta, it's already more common for people to think in 3D shapes. So they already buy, for example, pasta in different beautiful butterfly shapes, for example, or chocolates in all kinds of shapes. So there it's quite easy. But if you're really going into more fruits, vegetables, and meats, I think that boundary is still a bit higher because we're so used to going to the supermarket and what's off the shelf. But slowly, and especially with more companies entering the space, I do believe that this hurdle can be overcome quite quickly. But it's mainly due to educating the field.
I don't know if Simon would like to add something. Not.
Yeah, I think probably from the cultured meat perspective, we're kind of lucky in that sense, which is that by the time you've spoken about the cultured meat technology and growing cells in bioreactors and so on, if they're going to be worried about technology, then the people that are worried about technology and food, they're already worried by that. So the printing is really, that's the least of their concerns. And that's, it's kind of making light of it, but it really is, as technology touches on food, it's a very, very sensitive subject. And I think actually, in a sense, it's a bit like you were saying, there are many companies coming to market. It's important that, everybody behaves and that there are no scandals, because it's such a young and delicate, stage of this kind of market, that if there are any scares, whether they're founded in truth or even if they're just rumors, it's potentially quite threatening to this kind of an industry, because we've got probably, if you look at cultured meat, it seems as if 50% of people are really open to trying it, and probably about the other half want to sit on the sidelines and wait it out. And I'm sure depending on what the product is, you'd have similar numbers just around the printing as well.
It
Uh,
changes fast. It was 75% who was hesitant at first, and now
Yeah.
I think we're more towards 45% who's still hesitant. So it
yeah,
does change. But as we're in a different target market and our customers are chefs, for example, they are putting the machine in front of the
Yeah.
customer's eyes. And like molecular cooking years ago, which was also a big trend, of course, and also was a bit strange with gases and all those things going on. I do think that people and educating people and having the right ambassadors explaining what you're
yeah.
doing is very important.
I like this statement. Thank you, Nina. Next question from Denise. Hot topic within additive manufacturing is lowering the cost per part in comparison with traditional production technology. Is 3D printing food not very expensive in comparison to the benefits of it? In my opinion, you have to produce food based on insect protein and have this printed to make it more appealing. Thank you, Denise. That was my next question, actually. So I'm very glad to give the floor to Simon for this one.
Sure. I think it's one of these things. It's a new technology, and as Nina said, they're focusing on a relatively high end of the market, and certainly with cultured meat, that's also going to be initially introduced as an expensive product relative to cheaper commodity things.
Yeah,
So we can expect it to be more expensive, but what you get then, and I think this happened in traditional 3D printing also, is the technology seeks out the solutions that are best suited for any kind of given time of cost structure. And so, early days for additive manufacturing was, hey, let's do dental or let's do jewelry. It happens to suit the technologies really well, but they're also both really high margin spaces where the current way of doing things was very expensive, or or you can solve a problem that can't be done any other way. And I'm sure we could have a look at all the magical things that the biflow systems can make that you could
yeah,
never make by hand. You couldn't make that product any other way. So it has inherently higher value than the alternative, not least because the alternative doesn't even exist. So I think one finds that you'll use it for making things that are impossible to make. You'll make it for things that are really personalized or really customizable. Or you'll make it for very discrete niche interest groups initially. And meanwhile, the technologies improve, the throughputs increase, the cost structures come down, the batch sizes get bigger, and you get more and more applications.
Nina, I'm sure you want to add something.
Now, first of all, I totally agree with what Simon is saying. And again, touching my previous point is also that consumers don't know what should be the actual price of our foods that we buy into the supermarkets. And I believe those change in certain ways are disturbed, and that we're paying prices that shouldn't be paid, and that people suffer from that as well. So I think in that sense, technology in general is a great benefit to make supply chains more clear, to make it more transparent, to see where we can save costs, for example. And I think it's important to emphasize that 3D printing is just a tool to make a certain product. And in the way that we do it, it's indeed more now focused on the high end, but also already considering how can 3D printing, for example, in the future add to personalized foods, so that we're really thinking about foods that are good for your body, preventing potentially certain diseases. Think about heart diseases or diabetics that could, in the end, maybe save costs from the healthcare system. So, it's all connected already to each other as well. Food and health, for example, the planet. I mean, in terms of meat, we're trying to save the planet. We know that if we have less animals on the planet, that CO2 emissions are going to be way lower. So if we can find ways to make that possible, we don't have to spend that much money anymore on lowering those emissions. So it's all connected to each other, and I think 3D printing on itself will not be the solution, but it will become a whole new ecosystem where technology like 3D printing, but also other technologies will play an important role to really start calculating the costs for food, but also to see where we can make changes that are good for the environment and good for people. And I believe 3D printing could be a tool for making that happen, both on the short term, but definitely on the long term.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Nina. I have another question from an attendee. This one is also coming from the YouTube channel. Is 3D printed meat an opportunity for vegetarians to rediscover the taste of meat, or are we talking about a completely different kind of culinary experience? This one is for you, Simon.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think it's one of these questions. It's a question that I get quite often.
Yeah,
Is you guys are making meat and you're using cells and a biotechnology process, but the end product is very meaty. You know, it's got all the ingredients that you'd expect to have in conventional meat, or at least most of them. You know, one of the things it doesn't have any blood in it because there wasn't an animal involved in the process. So certain things perhaps need to be, you know, supplemented to make sure you maybe get that little tang of iron, you know, in the flavor that you'd normally get from blood, for example. But absolutely, I mean, the mission is that the vegans that miss meat, and actually it's one of these things, it's one of the statistics that I was really surprised to read. You know, people typically don't stay vegan very long. You know, the typical sort of life cycle of a vegan is somewhere between, I think, 18 and 24 months, but it's because it's, you know, for some people it's challenging, for some people it isn't.
yeah,
But absolutely, if you're looking to minimize, you know, your impact on the environment or impact on animals, you know, and this is one way of keeping, you know, keeping vegans on the straight and narrow, getting flexitarians to, you know, to eat even more flexibly, or get the meat eaters to eat something new without even noticing. That would certainly be the mission. So yes, absolutely, vegans and vegetarians more than welcome. Not all of them want to try that. You know, many say they've moved on, but we'd be happy to see them.
your response just reminded me of my conversation with Nina at the first time we talked to each other. I was so blown, regarding the way she was talking about 3D food printing, the way people could get into it and then actually making it part of their daily habit. So yeah, I don't really know how I should position myself, actually here about it because everything is quite new for me, for myself actually. And at this stage, the only thing I've tried and that I've liked is 3D printed chocolate. So that's the only thing I can say about it. So yeah, so I'm really looking forward to see how these market can go, how far it can go, and how far it can convince even people who love meat to actually turn to 3D printed meat. Because as you've just mentioned, that's a way to address food waste issue and even to address the global economic crisis regarding food. But from a
And
consumer
it
perspective, yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, very serious either. It's technology and software and hardware and machines,
Mhm.
but you can also have fun, or you can
Yeah.
think about new creative ways of, you know, how can you make something different. Maybe
Mhm.
the way it's printed means that you can let it cook differently. You know, bits could be thicker or thinner, and so you can have, and you can open up new opportunities for chefs or for restaurants or even for people at home. You know, I
Yeah.
want the quick cook steak, or I want the one where the fat and juicy bit is right on the edge. Or, you know, one of the reasons that Wagyu and Kobe beef is super expensive is because of the way the fat is positioned in the product. It's you know, it's still beef, but it gets
Mhm.
a huge premium because of the structure. And you know, if you can make complex and intricate structures repeatably, you can make the kinds of things that today are exotic and scarce and expensive and premium. Maybe, you know, we'll see that those things become more available for, you know, for the average wallet.
Yeah.
It might even democratize food as well, you know, as customize.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can add something to it as well, it's what's
Yes.
also very exciting, and I think we also discussed that, Katie, before.
Yeah.
That if you take a look at global trends, what happens also to consumers, that there are even cities in like New York, for example, where apartments don't even get kitchens anymore because they're just too small to have a kitchen inside, but also because people don't eat at home that much anymore, or don't cook anymore. They go for convenient ways, like picking up their food or eating out, or getting their food delivered. I mean, especially during COVID, you've probably seen the rise of delivery of foods. And I think that is also very exciting with terms of technology and 3D printing in particular, that it can create your meal in the way that you want it and get it delivered to your house. And in that way, maybe also people have less knowledge on how their food is created, because it's being done in a different place. So I think it's very exciting, and I don't believe it will only be limited to, let's say, vegetarians or flexitarians or meat lovers or whatever. I think it's really an exciting technology for everyone, and I also believe, I'm still quite young myself, that the new generations will probably not even remember that we ever used to slaughter cows or travel our beans from Peru to the Netherlands, for example, just for food. So I believe it's really exciting that additive manufacturing now really starts to break through in the food industry as well, and to come up with new food products that are better for the planet, better for your body, better for the animals, etc. So I'm very excited to see those trends.
Thank you, Nina. I know we just have 10 minutes left, but I wanted to take this question from Denise. I don't know if the audience still has any question. Please feel free to do so, as we have 10 minutes with our industry insiders. And this one, I think it's for you, Nina. What does it take to have a 3D food printer in any kitchen?
Yeah, so if it's let's say in a home kitchen, that is something I wouldn't see coming so soon. As I was mentioning, one of the trends that people have no longer a kitchen, for example, or go out for dinner, or go for the easy way to get it delivered, or for takeaway. I think those trends will only increase in the coming years, especially with people traveling for work again, being busy, having social lives, etc., etc. What does it mean for a printer to come in the kitchen of a chef, for example? That is really, if you have a proposition around that you want to create new food products, you want to experiment with your menu, for example, or you want to create products that are tailor-made for your customers, I think then the 3D printer is one of the only tools that you should add to your kitchen to make that possible. Of course, you can also work with molds, for example, but that cannot be done for every food product. And again, molds are also a waste of a product that can be reused, but at a certain point you want to throw them out, you want to get some new products in, and with 3D printing, the possibilities are truly endless. So if you're convinced as a chef you want to stay ahead, you want to offer your customers something unique, something special, then the 3D printer is the way to go. And as you can see, it's a beautiful product, so you can put it in front of the shop or in your kitchen, that doesn't matter. It's fully tailor-made for chefs.
Thank you, Nina. My my last question before you give your concluding thoughts. From a consumer perspective, I know consumers tend, to be more and more concerned about eco-friendly products. So sometimes look for information on the way they are produced. Do people look impressed with 3D printed food? Does the use of a certain technology to produce food raise some concerns, actually?
So to answer the first question, are people impressed? Well, yes. I can quickly show an example that I have here. So this is a chocolate vase, for example. Well, this can really not be made with a mold. It's very delicate, very unique object, which can be printed quite fast. Well, if you can see this in a shop, then people immediately, what I heard here, what we research is that people immediately want to take a bite because it looks exciting, it looks new, and they want to try it out and see how it works in terms of texture and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So are they impressed? Yes. if the use of technology raises some concerns, well, I think we touched the topic a few times during this discussion, that in the beginning, yes, definitely, because it's technology is being brought in front of your eyes. Again, many people don't know that in the food industry, 3D printing or extruding food is quite common. So we're just used to getting our hamburger or sausage from the supermarket, and we're used to that shape, let's say. As soon as you put that printer in front of the eyes and you recreate that hamburger or that sausage, people tend to believe like, how is that possible with technology? You must have added something special. So I do believe that it took us several years, so let's say 5 years, to come now to 45% of people that still have concerns about 3D printing food. But again, as many companies are entering this space, and I see the meat market, but also the chocolate market in 3D printing really exploding. I think that soon this concerns will be over, and educating will take over to really explain people what 3D food printing is, and that it's a safe method, and nothing really happens to your food.
Thank you, Nina. Simon, do you want to add something?
I think other than the fact that I think people are excited, the people that find it threatening, it'll take some time, and that's a communications challenge that the industry is going to have to use. But it's exactly that. When you start to see the beauty or the complexity or the excitement or the fact that you can make food that's easier to swallow, or the fact that food's healthier, or that maybe less waste goes into it, or that the manufacturing is local and the food miles on the end products drop. There's so many parts of this narrative and this puzzle that are really socially exciting and personally exciting. That I'm pretty convinced that if the prices come down and the throughputs go up, there'll be more and more printing, and no reason not to.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, I think there are no longer questions from the audience. So, maybe can you share your concluding thoughts on where the market is headed according to you? Or Nina, you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Yeah, well, so first of all, we're very excited to bring a new 3D printer to the market later this year, which will be this machine, so dedicated to chocolate printing. We use patented technology for that, which is inside of the print heads. But this is the first implementation of that. So chocolate, of course, is a very exciting ingredient and will lower the barriers for consumers to eat 3D printed food, as we were discussing today. But with this same technology, we already know that we can make other products. For example, personalized chocolates, in the sense that you can also add certain vitamins, minerals, proteins to it. And that's also where we really see the future heading, that 3D printing would really help into personalized nutrition. So creating food that is good for your body, that looks appetizing, that tastes good, that has a unique tailored texture, like we were touching on before during this discussion. So in my opinion, 3D food printing will become the technology or the tool to make personalized nutrition possible, and hopefully also help to prevent certain diseases in the coming years. So I'm very excited to see where that's going. Science needs to speed up right there. Money needs to come more into the market. Laws are very important, but I do see that coming now, and I'm very excited to see where it's going to be, because after 5 years of being almost alone in this market, now we're very excited to see so many companies joining. So let's start pushing together and building this ecosystem of 3D food printing around the globe.
Thank you, Nina. Simon, any last words?
From the cultivated meat perspective, obviously, we're super excited to be on part of that journey of reducing waste and reducing the environment and giving the animals a bit of a break. And we think that printing is one of the ways of allowing that culturing technology to be more easily digested and more appealing, to a wider market. It just allows you to do more with the same ingredients than you could do in other ways. And I think that's the common thread, whether it's at industrial scale or in a cordon bleu chef's hand. Either which way, you're using perhaps the best, the purest, the highest quality ingredients. You can just make them do more exciting things. and why not?
Thank you, Simon. While on these good comments, I would like to thank the audience for listening to us until the end. Thank you for joining us and for being so reactive today. Stay tuned for the last session, for the next session that will be announced soon, and stay safe wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Have a nice evening, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.